Good evening. Tonight, we're going to have somebody on that we all count on, whether we know it or not, who leads a group of people that we all count on, whether we admit it or not, a group that we can be really proud of. And when we look outside of Milford versus in Milford, and we see what other towns and cities are going through, I'm very, very proud of the fact that we've had 2 demonstrations about Milford Police. Both of them have been very positive. And I only hope that we continue to support these people, because I don't know what it feels like to go out with a bullseye on my jacket, but there's a group of people that do every day, and hopefully we'll show them the respect that they deserve. And if we find one of the 1% that aren't deserving of our respect, we'll take care of it. Now, we'll start with an introduction, but since we're 8 feet away, we can take the masks off for now and keep them off till we try and leave the studio, because then we'll be less than 8 feet. Chief, why don't we start with an intro?
Thank you, Al. I want to thank you very much for the offer and the opportunity to come and sit with you tonight. It's an honor for me to be here, and I'm happy to be. I'm a Milford kid, born and raised. My family grew up in the Plains. My mom and dad bought a house on the other side of town when I was probably that big. And my brother, Al, and I, who you remember is a retired firefighter from Milford. We were born here, raised here, and our roots are deeply sown here. You're probably one of the few people around my age bracket. I'm not going to say how young we are, but you're smack dab in between my brother and I. And you're old enough but young enough to remember my grandfather, Emilio, who I know you had a lot of great esteem for. And he instilled in us, as did my mom and dad, that public service is important. My grandfather was a public servant for 45 years in this town, and 99% of it was unpaid. It was all volunteer, but he did it because it was important. He loved it. When we were younger, you may recall that my grandfather back in the 60s was the superintendent of the Milford Medical Home, which is now Countryside. And we never knew how well we had it back then, but old family tradition. My brother and I were little. We were in charge of cutting the grass and taking care of the dogs. And my grandmother was a cook. She cooked in the kitchen for several years because they didn't have a cook. So he said, "Come on, Angie, let's go. We got to go cook for the people." So they did. But we grew up in that era, and at that location, nobody realized what they were doing back in the day. For my grandfather to be the superintendent of this place with a 4th grade education, migrated here from Italy. He used to have 2 collies all the time that lived at that location, at that facility. And nobody understood what it meant at the time. Today they call them service dogs. But they were just 2 full-grown collies that would just meander the halls, and the people could hear them coming, and they loved being with the dogs and playing with them. My job was to clean up after them and feed them. And my brother always found something more interesting to do, so those kinds of things fell to me, but that was fine. But those were great times in Milford. Coming through the Milford school system, Sacred Heart School, 9 years including kindergarten, and then off to Milford High, and getting an education here. Again, we never realized how good we had it. We were just young kids and living our lives. Mom and dad said, "You want to play ball? Here's your bicycle.
Right, go.
Have a nice time. Don't forget to be home before the street lights come on." But it was great growing up here. And for many of us, like in most communities, most people, you don't realize how good you had it until you're grown and you have kids, and your kids are now having kids. And I was lucky enough to have 3 wonderful children, 2 boys and a girl that are all in their 30s now. And I have a 10-month-old granddaughter, my first, and she is just the apple of my eye. She is an absolute doll. And we're all living in Milford. We all live a half a mile from each other. Every Sunday, we still get together, family dinners like we did when you and I were growing up. And
Well,
it's just a pleasure.
it's hard to understand, when people are so transient in today's day and age. I realized I knew the young man who was smashing me against the boards when somebody yelled, "Pighetti, get out of the way." And I looked and I said, "Oh, you're kidding me." Well, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
I want to tell your father you're beating up on an old man. But, you laugh, because I told my daughter, she's now a true Milfordian. She's third generation Milford, and she lives within 2 miles of her mother. And the second is just as important as the first.
Yep.
And it's hard because, like you say, you grow up in Milford, and I was one of the kids who did what everybody always said, ran away. Ran to Worcester, then to D.C., then to Paris, loved D.C., loved Paris. But when it came down to raising a family, there was something about coming back to this little town.
Yes, absolutely.
And you can't explain it to people that you say, I can go down the police station, I can go down the fire station. And these are people I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
When we had a neighborhood party, and one of the little kids fell off the wall and cut his forehead, within minutes, Engine 1 was there, and there was Teddy DiPaolo and Scott Marshall, and, you go through, everything. This year on the soccer field, my grandson started playing soccer last year, and there was a girl, Pat Salmon's daughter, who was on my soccer team for, so many years.
Mm-hmm.
There's just something unique about Milford. You came from the Plains. I came from the Heights. So my job was any new joke I heard to make it Italian before you made it Portuguese.
Yeah. They had their twists.
You just had to get it in. And then I used to call up by the Larches, going to the band concert in Hopedale, the great unifier.
Yeah.
Because it didn't matter that you were from Luby Ave or from the Plains or from the Heights. When you went over that hill, boy, nobody better touch you because you're Milford.
Mm-hmm.
No, I came back and said, get back to the Plains. Chief, one of the things that I think I'd like to hear is, in your opinion, what is the most important responsibility the Milford Police Department has?
Public safety, in a term. What that means really is we take very seriously our responsibility, and we take very seriously the oath that we took to protect and to serve. And that's the way we look at it every day. We are there to keep people safe. But from my opinion, the serve portion of protect and serve is what we really do every day. We serve the public. By that I mean we commingle with the public every day. It's not like we go to a factory and work and then we come out and we come home to our community. We work in the community. These folks are raising their families in this community. Their kids are going to school with everyone else's kids, and they're interacting with the public all the time. They are part of the public. They're part of the fabric of this community. And that's the most important thing to me, to have them understand, as they do, that to serve is an honor. We all understand the protection part. We signed up for that. We went to the police academy. We trained very hard for that. They're very highly trained. They have all the tools and the skills they need, and they're very good at it. But the serve part is what we do 90% of the time. And that's what's most important.
Now, the relationship between Milford Police and the community is not something that's shown in the papers. What we read in the papers is the 1% bad cop. You never hear about, for people who grew up in Milford, I still remember playing hockey with Artie Russo. He was older than me, but he used to take us to the hockey rink and we'd play. And now when he became Officer Russo, yeah, he deserves respect, but it's still Artie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And he preferred it that way.
And if he looked at you the wrong way, it's like, yipe. You couldn't be mad at him because you remember when he drove you to the hockey rink.
Yep.
But it seems like there's a real unique relationship between the officers in Milford and the community.
Yes, there is. And there were more of us back 20 or 25 years ago, 30 years ago, that were more from Milford. Most of the department was from Milford. Today, it's a little bit more diverse because some people can't afford a home in Milford because of the rates and whatnot, but very quickly they're finding out that all the surrounding towns are following suit very quickly. But there was a time when you could buy a house in, for example, Mendon or Upton, one of the closer communities, smaller communities, and it wasn't a big deal. But today, in today's economy and the way the markets are and things like that, it's very difficult to afford a home close to here. So, but the majority of our department is still from Milford, and that means a lot. But the people, even though they may live in a neighboring community, they're equally as dedicated as the ones that live here.
Do you feel we're compensating our police officers adequately? Loaded subject. I know that you...
The Police Association would say no.
Of
They would
course.
expect me to say no. I think, well, just what many people may not know is that the northeast region of this country is one of the richest regions in the country, and a lot of everything that happens, whether it be in private business or the public sector, the rates that people get paid have a tendency to be a little bit higher. And that's good. That's great for us. But also the cost of living is higher for us than in some other parts of the country. But everything is relative, and I think that the officers are compensated well. We could always afford to use a little bit more money.
Oh, of course.
None of us are willing to stand up and say, I'm making too much, here's some back. But by and large, I think they're very happy. They make enough money to support their families in a very decent way. They live in nice neighborhoods and decent homes, and by and large, they're very happy with the compensation that they get.
So now, how is the police department structured? I mean, we all see the people driving around, or you'd see Artie driving his motorcycle, but it's officers, detectives. I mean, how does that all work?
Currently, we have 49 officers that are sworn, and 37 of them are patrol officers. Most of them, the lion's share of them, are in patrol. Those are the ones you see in uniform in the patrol cars and those sorts of things. We also have 3 motorcycles that they're part of the patrol unit, but a lot of times they have different assignments. Like our motorcycles, you'll see them on the bike path constantly. They do the bike paths in the schools. That's part of their patrol area. Most of our police cars that you see on a daily basis, they have sectors in town that they are responsible for, and they cover those. They go anywhere depending on the call, the need, but primarily there's like A, B, C, and D sectors that they're responsible for. We have a Main Street car that we've had for many, many years. But by and large, that makes up the patrol force. Also, there is a detective unit which we call investigative services. There's 4 patrol officers that are their rank is patrolman. There's 4 detectives in that unit and a sergeant that supervises them. So there's a total of 5. Plus, adjunctly to that unit is the school resource officers. We have 2 of those. One is dedicated solely to the high school because of the amount of kids that are there, and the other officer spreads himself out amongst all the elementary schools, but they're in the schools every day. In addition to that, we have what was created a couple of years ago called the Special Operations Team. A lot of people look at it as a SWAT team. That's what a lot of people identify. They recognize that term, but they're not a SWAT team. They are specially outfitted. They are specially trained to a degree, but their primary function is to be in our schools, which they are every single day. Every time there's a school function, there's either a school resource officer there or a special operations officer. They work a split. They work days and evenings. So if there's an evening function at the school, if we were in non-COVID times and You know, as probably better than most people in town, how active the schools are in the evenings with all the special education classes that they offer and all the special things that they have. So we have officers there during the day when the kids are in school and in the evenings when there's sports functions and other things happening at the school, at whatever school they're at. Somebody's always there.
Now, there's been a lot of press, and to be transparent, I've been attacked for supporting the idea of a SWAT team. And I don't care what you call it. I mean, I remember when the proposal came to us for $600,000, gulp, and as we listened, something stuck in my mind when they said, we're really proud of the fact that we can have our special operations force put together. Our SWAT team can be in Milford within 42 minutes, which is pretty impressive from all the different areas.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said the average shooting in a school is over an 18. And I remember looking at Chris saying, God help us if we don't support this. How could I look at a Milford parent and say, you lost your child because we wanted to save whatever money? How's it working? I mean, you hear the negative that armed people in school are a bad visual. But
Yeah.
I can also feel, it's personal. I grew up with Artie. I grew up with Joe Dias, Carlo Ducaral.
He was the truant officer.
Yeah.
Carlo Ducaral was the truant officer back then.
His father, his mother, you know, Joe Duke was in my class.
Yep.
So you grew up with police officers, kind of like the old vision that, yeah, they're here, they're part of you. But they're a little special because they are police officers. Don't mess around. In your opinion, having armed officers, people, whatever you want to call them, SWAT, I don't care. Good idea or bad?
In today's society, absolutely. It's a great advantage to have. In a perfect world, there shouldn't be a need for it.
World peace. Michael, world peace.
We're working on it.
Right? We don't need an army in any part of the world because we're going to have world peace.
We're working on it. But that said, the officers that are assigned to that unit are so good. I can't say enough nice things about them. They're working very hard every day. And the most important thing is, from a public safety perspective, it's comforting for people to know that when they send their kids off to school every day, that there's someone there looking over them, watching over them, and is there to protect them. And that's absolutely our priority. But equally as important is these officers are in those schools every day, and they are making relationships with the administration, the counselors, the teachers, and the children. So these kids are not intimidated by a police officer.
Right.
They're used to seeing one every day. So when they see one in a different environment, they don't think twice about it. And these officers are making the best relationships with these kids. It's amazing. You know, it's Officer Carlos or Officer Woody or whatever the case may be. They have a one-on-one relationship with these kids. And that's part of what we wanted to accomplish. Again, it's part of the serve portion of protect and serve. But what we can get out of this tangibly, somewhere down the road, if there's something that happens, and we are, in our business, we look for information. That's our key. That's what solves crimes. We need information. They're more likely to give us that information because they have that relationship. Where, for example, a 10-year-old child in the elementary school probably wouldn't go up to a police officer and say, I saw X. But because they've had several years of that interaction that's been nothing but positive, then they don't think twice about it, because that's the way we have trained them to, if you see something, say something. If someone does something to you that isn't inappropriate, come and tell us. So those relationships are invaluable. You can't put a price on those.
Well, I remember back when we were in the old high school, there was a bomb threat. And sure enough, the cops you knew, they didn't come out as police officers. They came over and said, any of your group do this?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to say? I'm going to get wrapped upside the head with a hockey stick the next time I step on the ice.
Yep.
You know, I mean, but it was more than that. It's like, wait a minute, I owe this guy. He's one of us. And, you know, you could say, no, but go look over there.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make me into a rat,
Yep.
but go look over there.
You might want to take a look around the corner.
And all of a sudden, you know, and who knows what could have happened.
Right.
You know, had it been a real bomb threat, we kind of knew it wasn't because the kids were blabbing, only amongst the kids. But again, when you got officers that, I'll say it, you respect. You know, I was lucky. I've never run into the bad 1%. And I have no doubt that there's a bad cop out there, you know, that does something, whether it's intentionally malicious or just, you know, some new officer that got scared and pulled the trigger when he shouldn't have. But the 99%, I mean, all the ones I've dealt with so far, have lived up to the sign on my front lawn that said, we support our local police department.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they continue to act that way, that sign will be there and proud.
Yeah. They're very honorable, stand-up people.
But you know, it's funny because my inherited son, who went to school with my daughter, who became part of our family, had a whole different view coming from Southern Virginia. Mm. And I remember we went down to the local brewery here, and Tom O'Laughlin was there, and we sat down next to him, and we got talking, and Chris looked at me and he said, Al, is this the police chief? And I said, yeah. And I didn't understand till we were driving home when he said, I've never sat with a police chief and just talked. I said, well, he's the police chief, but he's also our neighbor. He's a Milford guy. And it was just amazing to him. And he's also the one that taught me about DWB, which I never, his car broke. I said, why don't you take Emily's car? He says, oh, that'd be nice, but have bail ready. And I said, why? He goes, DWB. My answer was, LMNOP to you. What the hell are you talking about? He says, driving while black.
Yeah.
I was actually happy I'd never heard that in Milford. But he explained to me that he's going to be driving a Lexus with Emily on the license plate and a cheerleading thing. And he goes, being 6'8" and black, I may get attention. And it hit me. Like, oh my God. Here's a well-educated man. Never had a problem in Milford, but he wasn't staying in Milford. He was driving to Boston. Mm-hmm. It's sad that he grew up in an environment that he thought it was so exciting to sit with somebody like you and just share a drink.
Yeah.
But it's nice that we grew up in Milford without that.
Yeah, most people wouldn't recognize that acronym because it's never been part of the fabric of this community.
I had never heard it. You know, of course, my daughter's looking at me with her head down. She lives in Boston, like, you know, you're so parochial. Now, you added new staff. I hear we got some doggies, or a dog.
We have a canine. His name is Kodak. He's about 1.5 years old, I believe. He is currently in his 3rd week of training. That's week 3 of a 14-week course. His handler is Officer Pat Matuzis, who came to us a little over 1 year ago. Transferred to us. He started July 1st of 2019. Very conscientious young police officer. He's got a good head on his shoulders. The lead instructor at the academy has already said that the two of them are a perfect match. I don't know how we got there, but they seem to be working well, the two of them, because they are now a team. Pat will never get to go anywhere by himself anymore because I don't know how long, and God bless him, he just got married last week. I don't know how long it's going to take before his wife gets jealous because he's going to spend more time with the dog than her. But that's just the nature of the beast, and no pun intended. But the dog is highly intelligent, doing very well, and they are number 1 and number 2 every week in their class.
Okay. Besides giving Pat a friend so he's not out there by himself, why do we need a dog? What does a dog do that other officers don't?
Huge asset. They come with a skill set that we don't have.
Okay.
They have more highly sensitive sensories. Their eyesight is 10 times what ours is. Their sense of smell is phenomenal. And they are trained to do things that most police officers would think about doing. They're trained to act.
Like
So
what, Michael?
They're trained to, if someone attacks the officer, the handler, the dog is automatically trained to go.
To defend.
Doesn't wait for a command. He is trained to go, where a human has to process that. The dog also has to process it, but they process it much faster because they've been trained to do X. They haven't been trained to think about what else is around me, what are the alternatives. They are trained to do what they're being asked to do, and they are phenomenal. It's a huge asset to the department. I can't say enough about what canines are capable of doing. Best part is they can be your best ambassador. I don't know, I'm sure you remember 15 or so years ago, we had a canine. His name was Merlin, and he was a 110-pound shepherd. He was as big as a house. He was as big as a house. But that dog had a particular skill, and it was inherent in him. It wasn't because he was specially trained that way, but he was trained the same way that this dog, Kodak, is being trained. He's being trained at the same facility, Boston Police Academy. They're world-renowned for their canine training. But this dog was so unique. And I have a story because I was a shift supervisor once, and the dog went in, and the dog was released to take this person down who was violent. The dog took the person down. We took him into custody. No one was hurt, which is huge because the dog can do a lot of that stuff, so you don't have to physically take people down. The dog can do that. But the point of the story is the dog did that. 2 hours later, the dog was sitting in a kindergarten at the elementary school, laying on the floor, and the 6 and 7-year-old kids were pulling his tail and pulling his ears. It was phenomenal, the aptitude and the demeanor of that dog. I've never seen another one quite like him, but he became the best ambassador for the police department because everybody in town didn't want to talk to the cops. They all wanted to see the dog.
Now, we see a lot of the canine units sniffing around the airports, and I assume they're sniffing for drugs and explosives and bad things.
Yep, primarily.
Is that like a big role for them, or?
It depends on the training. There's all different kinds of training, and they are trained specifically for that function. Kodak is being trained for patrol. So all of the skills that he's learning now, or that they're learning together, I should say, will enhance our patrol force. Because when they graduate, they're going to be back on duty, on a shift in patrol, just like all the other cops, except now we're going to have a canine that's available for us. If we need to go into a certain building that you believe someone's in there and they may be armed, we can send the dog in first, as opposed to a patrol officer, which is a huge advantage. And they're trained to do that.
Take the bullet.
Yep, they're trained to do that.
Really?
Kodak will have a bulletproof vest on.
Oh,
Yep, he will.
that's better, because I'm saying, poor doggy.
Yeah, but they're trained to do that, just like the military dogs. You know, they're trained to sniff out IEDs and things like that. The training is the same way. Additional training will come in time after they graduate from patrol school. our intent is to send the dog to narcotics school so that they can sniff out narcotics. So if you have, it happens very often, you get an officer that has a car stop and they suspect that there may be drugs in the vehicle. You bring the dog sniffs the vehicle, 9 out of 10 times they'll find it, where a human won't, because their sense of smell is so many more times better than ours.
Are you allowed
we
just
can
to
smell
let the
garlic.
doggy sniff?
I'm sorry?
Do you need like a search warrant or papal blessing?
Depending
or-
on the circumstances. If
So there are rules that you have to follow as to letting Kodak go sniff around?
Oh, yes, yeah, there's a ton of case law out there, because we've been doing this for so many years now with service animals, but the circumstances, we follow the law. Sometimes if there's no exigent circumstances, we have to step back, get a search warrant, and you can still use the dog, but you have to do it in conjunction with the warrant.
Inside the warrant.
Right. If it's on the street, 2 o'clock in the morning, there's exigent circumstances whereby if you don't act now, the drugs may be destroyed or whatever, because you're in a motor vehicle, the motor vehicle can move. So there's a whole different dynamic that takes place, but
Now, besides being in direct line of fire, to me, that would seem like the most scary moment for a police officer, is pulling somebody over for a speeding ticket or something on. I remember 12:30 in the morning, coming home from hockey, going a little too quick through Upton. You know, I was doing 38 and it's a 30-mile. I was wrong. I mean, you know, I'll admit it. Cop pulled me over. And for the first time, I was actually scared because I got my hockey bag on the front seat of my little red car. The officer came and I said, "Sir, I'm not being flippant and I don't want to be disrespectful, but my registration's in the glove compartment. How do I take this hockey bag off the seat without getting you nervous?" Because he doesn't know. I mean, what do I have in there? And it just dawned on me. He doesn't know that I'm just tired and I threw it into third gear instead of keeping it in fourth to go up the hill. Is that really a situation where police officers are more concerned than we are?
yes. And they're trained that way. We're trained to look at all the possibilities that we may be presented with. They're trained to look at people's hands. That's why a lot of times on a car stop, or you see it a lot just watching television, all the cop shows that are on TV, they make a vehicle stop and they ask the operator to put their hands on the steering wheel. It's because they want to be able to see their hands, because this is what can cause harm.
Oh, I could be reaching for something.
Yeah. Could be anything. Could be a weapon. You could be destroying narcotics or some sort of paraphernalia or whatever the case may be. But this is what can hurt a police officer. So that's why we always like to see people's hands. And with respect to your particular car stop, you did absolutely the right thing, because you let the officer know exactly the situation. You let him know that you're not the bad guy. I want to do whatever you want me to do, but I'm telling you, my registration's over there, and I can't get at it until I move my hockey bag. If you want to drag it out the passenger door, be my guest, but that was the right thing to do. You let the officer know so that the officer didn't get apprehensive for no particular reason.
Well, he laughed at me.
Well,
But
he's
I
got a
guess-
wonderful sense of humor.
I guess in all situations, you could just see the little snicker, and then he went back to being, officer on duty.
Yeah,
And he came back a few minutes later, says, "You haven't had a ticket in a while, huh?" I said, "No, 15 years." He goes, "Okay, go home." But, it was a scary moment because I don't want to disobey a command from a man with a gun. But on the other hand, I don't know how to react. Like you say, I have a registration. I really do.
I just can't get it.
But it's under my hockey bag.
Yeah, but like I said, you did the absolute right thing. And people, every once in a while, people will ask that question. Well, what do I do if I get stopped? I always tell them the same thing. Don't do anything. Put your hands on the steering wheel so the officer can see them, and wait for him
To tell
to give you
what?
instructions. Plain and simple. If they come to the window and say, "I'd like to see your driver's license and your registration, then if you're in a situation like yours, you explain it the way, because you're respectful, and you don't, like you said, you don't want that person to get nervous. So that's the right thing to do. But there's no sense in, the last thing you want to do is go, oh, I got pulled over. I know he's going to ask for my license and registration. You start fumbling around in the car. He's sitting in the police cruiser, he or she, is sitting in the police cruiser looking at you through the rear window saying, what are they doing? What is he or she doing? So that creates apprehension that doesn't necessarily need to be, because the officer doesn't know that you're just fumbling for your registration. They can think a million things. So
Now, you hear a lot these days about defund the police. I'm confused because, again, my opinion only, but if police need training, then I would say give them extra money and get them trained. But every time we've worked on a budget, every police chief I've ever dealt with would cut training before they cut an officer. So how does this work? If I take police off the street, how am I increasing safety? And if I cut money from you, aren't I taking cops? Because if I remember right, your budget's like 94% salary?
yes. Yeah. Salaries and wages is where the lion's share of it goes.
So if I cut money from you, what does that do to your effectiveness?
Well, eventually, it has a huge impact, because it will come down to bodies. Depending on the situation that the town is in, if they say, listen, we'd like you to cut $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, can you find that sort of money? Well, you can take a little bit from this line item and a little bit from that line item, and you can hopefully make that happen. But if you need to cut several $100,000, that's bodies. Those are men and women that are going to receive pink slips, because 94% of the budget is salaries and wages. And part of salaries and wages is the training line item, overtime line item, all those sorts of things, but it all comes out of personnel services. The rest of it is just general expenses that pay for electricity and vehicle maintenance and replacement of cruisers and those kinds of things, office supplies. But that only amounts to 4 or 5% of the budget. It's not a lot of money. And it's difficult. It's a difficult balancing act sometimes. But what a lot of people don't realize, because the news cycle is what it is in this country these days, and everybody has their particular favorites that they watch or listen to, or whoever they are, and they give their particular twist. But the facts of what's going on with defund the police right now, especially in Massachusetts, the legislature has got a tough job. They're struggling very hard to try to appease a lot of the people that want police reform, because that's the buzzword that they're hearing throughout the country. And some of it is very legitimate. But what a lot of people don't know, particularly in Massachusetts, is we have been way ahead of the curve from the rest of the country for a long, long time. And for approximately 8 or 9 years, the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association has, through the Massachusetts Municipal Police Training Committee, has proposed legislation to enhance training for police. And every year, for whatever reason, when the legislature, it never makes it out of committee. They bring it up, they talk about it, it never gains a lot of traction, because the state can mandate it, but they have a hard time funding it. But the fact of the matter is, all the things, or many of the things that are being proposed throughout the country for police reform, the police have already proposed that for many years. So we'd like to see some of those things happen, but we don't want to see it happen to the detriment of the officers that have to go out and put themselves in harm's way every day. The big buzzword right now is what they call qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is not what it's being proposed to be, what it's being put out to people as. Qualified immunity doesn't apply to just police officers. It applies to any municipal employee. Qualified immunity applies to a clerk that works at the town hall, just as
Yeah, but
well.
what I read is qualified immunity means, Michael, you can go out there, decide you don't like me, shoot me, for
Absolutely
no
not.
reason at all, and they'll turn around and say, oh, you're covered, you're a cop, you're
Right.
fine.
Right. Well, there's some people that are purporting that narrative. But the fact of qualified immunity is qualified immunity doesn't protect anyone that clearly has gone outside of the law. It does not. What qualified immunity covers with respect to police officers is if you have a misstep, for example, you make an arrest, and as a result of that arrest, the court case is determined that you did something that was incorrect.
You didn't have probable cause.
If you did it with good faith and you did it with the best of intentions, you didn't break any laws. But if you clearly broke a law or did something that was clearly outside of the realm of your training, and you know that it's the wrong thing to do, but you do it anyway, qualified immunity is not going to protect you at all. Qualified immunity is there to protect people who do their
So qualified immunity is if you
job.
make a legitimate mistake.
Exactly.
I mean, we're all human,
Yep.
not everybody's perfect.
Yep.
But if you go out and you decide you don't like me because I'm Portuguese and hit me upside the head or shoot me, there's no protection for that bad behavior.
Qualified immunity is not going to protect you from that. Absolutely not. You have broken the law, just like anybody else that breaks the law.
And how do you feel about that?
I believe that qualified immunity is good exactly the way it is.
But the guy or the gal who steps out and does something bad, intentionally bad, should we protect them?
That's the 1% that you spoke of earlier. They don't deserve protection.
See,
They've broken the law.
I can't judge because I've never gone out there with a bullseye that says, shoot me. And as far as I'm concerned, the officers out there, boy, they're a target for kooky people. So, if I don't walk in their shoes, I got to count on people like you to make sure their shoes are walking in the right lane.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
But there are people in law enforcement that clearly should be doing something else. Like I've said for many, many, many years that not all plumbers are good plumbers. Some plumbers should be carpenters. Some carpenters should be electricians. Some police officers should be something else other than what they are. Because for whatever reason, even though they passed the police academy and they did all the right things that they needed to do, they just don't fit into this profession, for whatever that reason is. So,
Michael, I'll be the first one to admit I could not be a cop. I don't know how I would react if I saw a bad person beating up or molesting or doing something to a child. I just don't know that I have the intestinal fortitude to stay calm, defuse the situation, because I'd want to whack them.
yeah.
Any sense of compassion I have goes away when I see somebody hurt. You have a granddaughter. Somebody hurts your granddaughter, mine. I don't know that I'd have the control. I don't know that I wouldn't, but since I'm not absolutely sure, I know I could not do that.
Yeah, but that's part of a police officer's training. When you're in the police academy, they train you to turn off your emotions. And again, we're human. We have human frailties. But they train us to be able to separate the emotion from the incident, deal with the facts, deal with what you're presented with. Don't let this cloud your judgment, because this will put you on a bad track. And it's difficult. It's very hard to separate sometimes in certain
It'd be nice if
serious
you could hire
situations.
Vulcans, from Star
Would be
Trek
nice.
that have no emotion.
Yeah. But again, like I alluded to a few minutes ago, with respect to Massachusetts being ahead of the curve, our training has been so far ahead of these incidents that we're talking about now, the George Floyd incident and things like that. First of all, I've been on this job, I started in 1980, so I've been around a little while. But we were never trained on how to apply a chokehold. It just doesn't happen in this state. Whether it happens some other place in the country, I can't speak to that. But I can tell you with great certainty, I was a trainer with the training council for many years. Nobody has ever been trained on how to apply a chokehold in this state, a police officer. Doesn't happen. We've been trained on de-escalation for many years. They're trying to say we need police reform and we need to teach the cops how to de-escalate situations. Granted, nothing's perfect, but we have been trained on how to de-escalate. Should we put a training component back in, maybe, that enhances that? I'm all for it. As a matter of fact, we have already in the Milford Police Department written in a component for all of our future trainings for defensive tactics and all those things that we practice every year, taser training and things like that we're going to start next week. That there's a de-escalation component in there.
Makes me think of what you started the show talking about. When you say training for de-escalation, yeah, Artie looked at you and everything got de-escalated real fast. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
Carlos, Joe, Diaz, they knew who you were. And
Yeah.
all they had to do is look over at you and, okay.
Yeah. But those were different times.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about...
Respect was inherent for a police officer back in those days. It is not so much today.
Now, you have 50 police officers in Milford. How's the morale? I mean, everything you read is demonstrations against the police. I mean, it's got to affect them. Sitting there saying, wait a minute, I'm going out there every day, you know, putting the life of the father of my children in risk.
Mm-hmm.
How does it not bother you?
It does. It absolutely does. And I can't tell you the amount of respect I have for each and every one of the officers that work from the Milford Police Department and all officers across the country to put that uniform on and that badge on every day, knowing the sentiment by and large in this country right now. It's hard because they're human just like we are. As I said earlier, their kids go to school with your kids. We all interact in the same community. We're all part of the same fabric of the community. But all of a sudden, because of one incident, the officer who you praised yesterday, now you're saying disparaging things against him or her? It makes no sense. But it's all about a narrative. It's not about the truth. We need to get to the truth, absolutely. There's no question. And every profession has its flaws. So let's work together to fix them. Let's not separate, you go to your corner, I'll go to my corner, and when the bell rings, we'll come out and fight. Let's work on this together. And that's what needs to happen. But the men and women of the Milford Police Department, I have the utmost respect for, because they're not very good conditions that they work under right now. Granted, to their credit as well, for many years, they have worked hard to develop the relationships they have with the people of this community, and that helps them quite a bit. We still have a lot of respect. There's a lot of people that call us and stop by. They'll see a police officer on the street and say, I really appreciate what you do. Thank you very much. As opposed to the rock throwing, so to speak, and all the defunding stuff. Defunding isn't gonna help things. But again, depending on who you listen to and what they have to say, what their narrative is, defunding is not necessarily a bad thing if in a certain respect. Some communities want to defund, meaning they want to take some of the money from the police budget and put it to social work and let those people handle the calls that all the police officers are handling now. Because quite honestly, over a period of years, the state of Massachusetts, as well as many states in the country, have taken funding away from mental health. And there are a lot of people in our community, nice people, but they are perfectly fine as long as they stay on their medications that has been prescribed for them. And when they just, not to sound crass, but when they just gave them a bottle of medication and sent them out into society to fend for themselves, they set them up to fail. And one of the first things that these people have within them that bothers them is when they take the medication, they don't feel right. So they stop taking the medication. They don't realize that the medication is keeping them from becoming schizophrenic or something other than normal.
Right.
The medication is there to help them, but they don't process that properly. And after they're off the medication for a couple of days, they don't process it at all, in most cases. So society is left to deal with them. Society, when they begin to act out because they're not on their medication, society calls the police. We're not mental health professionals. We have certain training that we've gotten over the years because the training council has said, you need to help us because you've closed the institutions that these people were in and they're not getting the services that they used to be provided with, so you need to help us so that we can help these folks. And it doesn't always mesh perfectly. Sometimes
now,
bad things
You're
happen.
talking about somebody off their meds or a situation that can make them not normal behaving person.
Mhm.
And I'm going to send a social worker in there all by themselves?
That's what
I'm
some of these people are
confused.
suggesting. Some people are also suggesting a partnership between the police and these specially trained folks
Okay.
to help people with mental illness, that you go together. Because I couldn't agree more. If this person is acting violent, you don't want to send a social worker in there by themselves. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and the 911 lines start lighting up because somebody is acting out and everybody's calling saying, come help this person or help me. And you don't want to send,
Michael, I don't want to go in there, and I'm a big rotund
Yeah.
person.
I get it. But
know
you
what I
don't
mean?
have any special
I'm not
training for it either.
trained
Right,
to de-escalate
right,
or to fend off a knife attack or, God forbid, a bullet.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. But that's, as I said, depending on the narrative that someone is trying to put out there, the term defund the police makes no sense,
feels like world peace again. Nobody will argue against it.
right?
Send a social worker in. He or
Yeah.
she will defuse the situation. All will be good. The person will get back on track.
Until it doesn't happen that way.
Right.
Then what? Now we have another person that we put in harm's way when it didn't need to be.
I read a lot about one of the issues with a lot of police departments is that their diversity doesn't mimic or fit in with the town, the city, the precinct that they're guarding.
Mm-hmm.
How does Milford stack up on that way?
Used to be very good. Our department was made up of Irish, Italian, and Portuguese. We had it all covered.
That's like our town.
But that said, now that I've got the funny part out, the diversity of this town has changed considerably. The complexion of this town has changed quite a bit. And what needs to happen, and we've tried from time to time, we being the state, not necessarily Milford. Milford has done its own campaigns, but many people from those communities don't apply for the job. They don't want to be police officers. So we still need police officers. So if you have a half a dozen police officers applying for the job that don't necessarily mimic the diversity of these ethnicities, we still need police officers. So you take them, you train them, and that's the best you can do. We would like to make some inroads in some of the Spanish-speaking communities, for one, to try and get some of those folks to see if they want to become police officers, because they would be a tremendous asset. I mean, we have officers, we have a lot of Portuguese officers that speak Spanish, they speak Portuguese, and they can understand some of it, but
it ain't the same.
No, it isn't, but at least
mean,
when
it's a good
someone is
half
screaming
step.
for help, they can
Yeah,
understand
it's
them.
a good half step, Michael, but let's face it, I'm from the Heights. A Portuguese comes in the Heights, or Portuguese person comes in the Heights, and immediately there's a half bond.
Mhm.
You know, especially if
Yep.
it's somebody, I go back to Joe Dias, who lived at the foot of the Heights.
Yep,
He wasn't just Portuguese, he was a Heights boy. So he automatically got a pass.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Waxed his car every weekend.
Carlos Ducarel the same way. You know, you sit there
Yeah.
and say, if you can do that, you know, the old story that they're just hiring good old boys from Milford, it's easy to throw that on you.
Yeah.
But when I look behind the charge, yeah, maybe it's good that they are. First of all, if they're from Milford or they have family in Milford, they're going to care a lot more about our town when they have
Yeah.
their kids in our schools. And
Yeah, yeah, but you can't force people to apply for a job. You have to go, I'm going through the process right now, and the only people I have to pick from are the people that applied. And it's difficult sometimes, because we have, for example, we have a growing Ecuadorian community in this town, and some of the dialects are very, very hard to understand. Point in fact, and I couldn't believe it when I was told the story, one of our dispatchers reached out to the Ecuadorian consulate to get a translator to speak to this person who was in the station under arrest. They couldn't communicate with them because the dialect was so different. I guess there's mountainous regions in Ecuador where it doesn't even sound like the Ecuadorian language. So it's hard to communicate with them sometimes. But would we love to have a few of those officers on the job to be able to communicate and to connect with that portion of the community? Absolutely, absolutely. But it's not easy, right? And right now it's even worse, because a lot of people aren't signing up to become police officers right now because of the sentiment in the country.
I was going to say, I don't want a job that no matter how well I do, I read in the paper every day that I'm a bum. I'm putting on
difficult.
a target, and
Mm-hmm.
most places in the country don't acknowledge that you're putting your life on the line for them.
Yeah.
I loved it when I heard the criticism about the Portland police, that they didn't send in enough cops when the demonstration turned ugly. I was like, wait a minute. The demonstration was to defund and get rid of the police officers. But when you need them, you know, I'm the first one to say, between you and the fire department, I hope I never use your services.
That's the goal.
You know, I mean, realistically,
Yeah.
I hope that we pay all this money for police protection of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I know you've done the best job you possibly could.
Absolutely correct.
But I do want to thank you. It's getting time to where we're going to be leaving the studio, so time to put the masks back on. We'll be closer than 8 feet apart or 6 feet apart.
Well, again, before we close, I want to thank you again for the opportunity. This was great. Besides, I haven't had a chance to sit and talk with you in a long time. And if you want to go out and play hockey again, I still have my equipment.
No, the smaller Pighetti took care of me that way.
He
As
still
always.
plays, by the way.
Yes,
He still
and he
plays.
plays well, too well. Get to know the police officers in this town. The more you know about them, the more you'll feel proud and happy. My sign that says I support the Milford Police is because of decades of living in this town, having cops who took me to hockey games, who could disarm a situation by just looking at us. We're very fortunate, and let's hope that the third demonstration we have about the Milford Police is the same as the first two, in support of the Milford Police. So as always, thank you to our 6 loyal viewers. May God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than today.
Thank you.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.